Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me. We're going to give everybody just 1 minute to join this conversation, and then we're going to start. So while we're waiting, I'm just going to introduce myself. My name is Natasha Tracy. Good afternoon. I am a mental health speaker and writer, and I am the host today for HealthyPlace. Today, we're going to be talking about a drug that has specifically been shown to be useful for patients with treatment-resistant depression. And we're going to be talking with Dr. Harry Croft, who's going to tell us all the details about it. And in this particular drug can help quite possibly in hours rather than weeks, like typical drugs. So it's very exciting. Now, Dr. Croft, who you can see there, Dr. Harry Croft, he is a board-certified psychiatrist and distinguished life fellow of the American Psychiatric Association. He is the medical director here at HealthyPlace, and he's one of the country's foremost experts on PTSD, depression, and addiction. Dr. Croft is presently the principal investigator at SA Research, which performs new clinical trials for new medications on behalf of pharmaceutical companies. Throughout his career, he has led research studies, authored hundreds of peer-reviewed articles and abstracts, and lectured to thousands of groups of clinicians about various aspects of psychiatry. Now, just to be clear, while Dr. Croft is extremely knowledgeable about this drug called Spravato, also known as Esketamine, he was not involved in the clinical trials of this particular drug, and he is not affiliated with Johnson & Johnson, nor its subsidiary Janssen, which developed this particular drug. So, good afternoon, Dr. Croft.
Hey, good afternoon, Natasha. And for those of you that don't know Natasha, she is a premier speaker on mental health issues. She knows it backwards and forwards. She's written a book, and she writes a lot of the stuff at HealthyPlace. So I'm very pleased to be talking to you, Natasha.
Well, thank you so much. Flattery will get you everywhere.
Hopefully easy questions.
Great. So while I have lots of questions for Dr. Croft, I know that our audience does too. So please make sure and leave your questions on Facebook, and I'll try to make sure that we get to them with Dr. Croft today. Okay. Oh, sorry. Can you give us a little background on how this new drug, known as Spravato and also known as Esketamine, can you give us some background on it?
Sure. The first question people might want to know is, why do we need a new antidepressant? We've got a couple of dozen antidepressants now available to us. Isn't that enough? And the answer is no, it's not enough. As people who have depression or know people with depression will recognize, the antidepressants we have are they fall short in a few areas. Number one, they don't work for everybody, and we don't have any idea at the beginning of trying a new antidepressant which drug will work for which one person. That's one of the problems. Number two is they take a while to get into effect. I mean, maybe as much as 6 to 12 weeks before we know whether they're going to really work or not. Number three, they have side effects that occur much more quickly than the effect we're looking for with depression. And so there is a need to look for new medications for depression. The medicines that we have now, that we use mostly, the SSRIs, the SNRIs, those drugs were developed with a theory that says there are brain chemicals, mainly serotonin and norepinephrine and dopamine, that are somehow deficient in their activity in the brains of depressed people. So we started looking at the norepinephrine drugs, the tricyclics, way back when, in the 50s and 60s, and then the SSRIs came out in the late 80s, Prozac was the first. And then we started looking for drugs that are like those. And so most of the drugs we have now work on those three neurotransmitters, and we call them monoamines, and those are the drugs we have. Well, people started looking at drugs that work in different ways. And then ketamine came along. So ketamine, which is not this drug, it's kind of the parent of this drug, but ketamine came along in the 60s as an animal anesthetic. It was approved for humans as an anesthetic and pain drug. It's still used in emergency rooms for anesthesia, especially in children. It's used for pain conditions, and it worked fairly well, but it caused dissociation, hallucinations and delusions, and seeing weird colors and hearing thoughts and imagining things. And then, as we humans are wont to do sometime, people started thinking, well, if it causes those things, maybe as a party drug, that would be cool. And so they developed ketamine in pill form, and they started using ketamine, which goes by the name Special K and other names, as a hallucinogenic drug. And so it was abused on the streets for a long time, to the point that the government restricted the use of ketamine other than in emergency rooms and anesthesia and pain situations. So about in the 90s, the people at the National Institute of Mental Health realized that this ketamine stuff, in addition to helping with pain and anesthesia, also helped with depression, especially those that were suicidal. And to their amazement, the ketamine, which was given intravenously, worked not in a matter of weeks or days, but hours or minutes to relieve the depression. And so they started looking at ketamine for the treatment of depression. Fortunately or unfortunately, around the country, there are developed clinics called Ketamine Clinics, which are now being used. And so the ketamine clinics, which were not approved for the treatment specifically of depression, and usually run by anesthesiologists and pain doctors who were familiar with ketamine, started opening up. They were cash-only business, and they were used primarily for the treatment of depression, even though the FDA hadn't approved it for depression. Once a drug is approved for anything, you can use it for what you want, even though it may not be approved for those other uses. And so the ketamine clinics seem to catch on in a lot of places. Here in San Antonio, we have 3 ketamine clinics. Well, at the same time, the people at several pharmaceutical companies started looking for other kinds of ketamine-like drugs that might help with depression. There were several being worked on. We worked on one of them, not this drug, by the way. And then the people at Janssen started working on this drug called Esketamine. Now, the S stands for the fact that many drugs are what we call racemic mixtures. So there's a left-handed side of the drug, that's the S side, and then there's a right-handed side of the drug, that's called the right or the D side of the drug. And the people at Janssen believed it was the S side of the drug more than the right side of the drug that worked. And they started developing esketamine, the next question was, how are we going to use it? Well, it doesn't yet work well orally. So they could have tested it intravenously. The other compound we worked on was intravenous. Ketamine itself, which is being tested at the National Institute of Mental Health, is in fact intravenous. But they decided to work on a nasal spray version of ketamine. They found out that it was effective. The FDA advisory committee that looked into it voted to approve it in March, in about 4 weeks ago, I think. And then the agency itself approved it just last week. So it's now FDA approved. This Esketamine nasal spray, which, as you mentioned, is called Spravato, has now been approved for use in treatment of what's called treatment-resistant depression.
So you mentioned earlier that this comes from parent drug that was a street drug. So can you tell me if there's a potential for addiction in this Spravato or esketamine?
Yeah, it was first approved as a drug, and then it became a street drug, but it can be abused. And the FDA was concerned in the approval of this drug, Spravato, that it could be abused. And so they developed, with the release of the drug, something called REMS, risk evaluation and mitigation strategies. And these are an effort, one, to keep it safe, and two, to keep it from being misused. So, number one, it's not going to be given to patients to take with them to their homes to use. It's going to have to be used in a clinic which has been certified as following the rules and agreeing to follow the rules. Number two, it will not be taken home. It will be used there as a nasal spray. And because of some concerns with side effects, the person will have to stay in the clinic for 2 hours after they get the nasal spray to make sure that there are no hallucinations, that the blood pressure doesn't go up, that there's no dizziness or other side effects from it. And because of the concern that it might be abused, the REMS will be in place.
That's great. Thank you. Can you tell us who would be a candidate for this medication? Who would be a good candidate? Who wouldn't be such a good candidate? And specifically, also, can you tell us if this will work for bipolar depression?
So right now, the FDA approved the drug for use in treatment-resistant depression. What that means is people who have taken an appropriate dose of an antidepressant for a long enough period of time and have failed on 2 different antidepressants. That's the way they're defining treatment-resistant depression. So right now, the drug is approved for use in patients with treatment-resistant depression. It has not been yet tested for bipolar disorder. We don't know what the future will bring, but we know that bipolar depression is actually a little bit different in terms of what it requires of treatment than unipolar, or what we call major depressive disorder. My understanding is there may actually be studies going on. I don't know this for a fact, but there may be studies going on for suicidally depressed patients, because ketamine has been studied for suicidally depressed patients. Let me just tell you an aside. I've been doing clinical drug trials on antidepressants for over 30 years. If a patient is suicidally depressed, they don't get to be in a drug study for depression. They're excluded. So to now include, and it wasn't in these original studies, but it may be being studied in patients with suicidal depression.
Thank you so much for that. Can you tell us, if I were a patient and I were going in for this particular treatment, what I might experience on that day?
So you would probably be evaluated carefully. One, to make sure you really do suffer from major depressive disorder, that it's not bipolar depression or personality disorder or something else. You would then go in and likely get a physical exam and vital signs to make sure your blood pressure is okay, to make sure your heart is okay. There were some concerns about blood pressure and aneurysms in the brain and blood vessel problems, so you'd probably be evaluated. And then you would be given an informed consent. That's part of the REMS program I mentioned, that the clinic has to be certified with REMS knowledge, that the patient has to be certified, and the pharmacy has to be certified. So the pharmacy doesn't give the drug to the patient, they give the drug to the clinic that then helps the patient. So you would be told on the day you went, don't eat or drink anything for about an hour or two before the administration. That's in case you get nausea and vomiting afterward. It's not going to be dangerous. You would go to the clinic. You would probably be given the nasal sprays. This drug comes in 2 doses, 56 and 84 milligrams. It actually comes in 28 milligrams. So you would get 2 vials of the stuff at 28 milligrams each. If you started at 56 milligrams, you would be given 3 vials of 28 milligrams if you started at the higher dose, 64 milligrams. So you would administer your own. The way you do it is you lean back and you spray it into the nostrils. It can cause, I understand, a little bit of a bitter taste in the back of the throat. It generally is said to work very quickly in a matter of minutes or hours. And then you would be kept at the clinic for 2 hours where somebody would be there. They would be asking about things. Are you seeing strange colors or hearing strange noises or imagining strange things? That is, do you have hallucinations or are you dissociating? They would probably check your blood pressure to make sure it didn't go up too high. They would ask you about nausea and dizziness and sedation. And then they would require that you have somebody drive you home because it can cause sedation.
Thank you very much. For anyone who is just joining us, we are talking with Dr. Harry Croft, and today we're talking about a new drug, Spravato, and specifically its use in treatment-resistant depression. So, Dr. Croft, I also just want to invite people to ask their questions. We are taking them on Facebook, and I will insert them as we go. So, Dr. Croft, this particular drug has a black box warning on it. And so people are always rightly concerned about that type of warning. So can you tell us a little bit more about that and how concerned we really should be about that?
Yeah. Look, this is not just a new drug, but a new mechanism of action drug. Remember, I told you that the drugs we use now for depression primarily are called monoamines. They affect serotonin, norepinephrine, dopamine. This particular drug works through a different mechanism, through a different chemical called glutamate. And it is because it works on by a different mechanism of action that it works so quickly. Let me go back. In the original ketamine trials, not with this drug, but with the intravenous ketamine at the National Institutes of Mental Health, when they studied it, they were amazed at how quickly this drug worked. People who were suicidal would lose the suicidal thinking within a matter of minutes or hours. They would feel better, maybe even well, the following day. Now, the concern always was, well, how long would that effect have? And they found out that it would work for maybe a week if just given in that one dose. And then they tried to figure out, well, is that enough? Or do we have to keep treating people? And so they started treating people 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. They found out they didn't need to treat them that often. They started actually at 5. They reduced it to 3. And now they've reduced it to 2. So with this drug, Spravato, it's given twice a week. Let me just tell you, if you go to the clinics, the first week you would get 2 doses a week for the first month. Then you would get 1 dose a week for the second month. And then you would get a dose maybe every couple of weeks or however often you needed it. But we still don't know nearly as much about this drug as we need to. So it did put a black box warning on it. It warned against using it in people less than 25 years. They warned about the possibility of suicidality. They warned that it can be abused and something about the REMs and so forth. You asked, do people need to be worried about that? We always worry about box warnings, but the bottom line is it appears that for those people with severe treatment-resistant depression who haven't responded to at least 2 other antidepressants, this drug is so helpful that it's worth taking spot of the black box warning, not ignoring it, but realizing that there are some things we still don't know about this drug.
Thank you, Dr. Croft. I know what everyone out there is going to really want to know is cost. Do we know how much this is going to cost for patients and if insurance will actually cover any of it?
So, as you mentioned up front, I didn't work on this particular drug, Spravato. I'm not employed by Janssen, part of Johnson & Johnson. And the answer is, I don't know for sure. But on the web, I've read that the cost is going to be something like $4,700 to mid $6,000 for, I think, a month. I don't know for sure. Will insurance cover it? That is certainly the hope. And I can tell you, I've read enough about the hope of people at Johnson & Johnson that they hope that insurance will cover it for those people in whom it might work, those with treatment-resistant depression. And that's the hope all of us have. Not only will it be FDA approved, but that ultimately insurance will pay for all or part of it. That's the hope, but I don't know that for sure.
Thank you. And of course, what we patients generally know is that not every drug works for every person. So my question for you about this drug is, what percentage of people is it actually effective for, and is it effective continuously?
So let me also tell you about the study that in this particular study, one of the studies that led to actually all the studies, but the one that led, the two that led to approval, this patients had failed on two different antidepressants and were not doing well on the antidepressant they were now on. So what they did for this study was they stopped their antidepressant, whatever they were on, because it wasn't working. And at the same time they started the Esketamine nasal spray, the Spravato, they also started them on a new antidepressant. They could be on, I think it was Celexa or Lexapro or Effexor or one of the other SSRIs. So this drug was not meant to be used by itself. So it's used in combination with an antidepressant. It's not called augmentation. That would be if they left them on whatever drug they already were on, and then they added this Spravato. That's called augmentation. But in this drug, they started them on a new antidepressant. Now we know that most of the new antidepressants don't work for 6 to 12 weeks. So if patients improved pretty significantly, they assumed, since these were only 4-week studies, it was due to the drug itself, Spravato. So in this particular study, in one of the studies that led to the approval, about 70% of patients got significantly better, at least half better, and about 53% of patients reached remission. Remission is the gold standard for depression. That's what we hope for, getting patients well. So, and not only did it worked quickly within the first few days of its use. So there's a lot of hope for this drug. Will it be the be-all, end-all? No. They're also working on other new drugs with even different mechanism of action for the treatment of depression. But this sure has hope for many people that haven't responded to other things.
Thank you so much. That actually leads me to my final question for you, and that is this a miracle drug? For people who are suffering with depression, is this the miracle they've been waiting for?
We always stop short of calling drugs miracle drugs, especially when the drugs haven't been in clinical usage yet. Especially this formulation of ketamine, esketamine, we don't know long term. There's a lot we don't know. We don't know, for example, what do we do if this drug works like the miracle drug for some people and then it stops working? What do we do then? We don't have enough data yet from studies to tell us. So there's a lot of work that we need to do. My hope is for severely treatment-resistant patients, maybe for suicidally depressed patients, this drug will start them on the road to recovery pretty quick. And in the process, will give them hope. Right now, many patients, as our audience will know, have lost hope. Gosh, they've been on 4 or 5 drugs and all kinds of treatments and nothing has worked. Let's hope that for them, even if it's not the miracle drug in the long run, in the short run, it gives them enough of a boost that it gives them hope that something can be done to treat their depression.
Thank you so much, Dr. Croft. I really appreciate you being here with us today. I know there are more questions, but unfortunately we have run out of time. We will make sure that every question gets answered on Facebook within 24 hours. Until then, my name is Natasha Tracy. Thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you for all your questions. Have a great afternoon.